My name is Evelina Horohovic. I'm with Canadian Mental Health Association and mental health educator there. And I'm very happy and grateful to be presenting to you all with Cynthia Maroon, who is the family support educator, yes? Or
family community caseworker.
Family community caseworker, yes.
Yeah.
And also CCAC, and has been working in addictions and trauma for multiple years with the House of Soffer scene.
Yeah.
Welcome everyone, and we'll get started.
Awesome. So if I just wanted to say, if you were with us yesterday, you might notice that you may see similar slides, but what we're going to be doing with some of the information is we're actually going to be showing it from the perspective of the concerned significant others. So you're going to get a lot of different information today, even though you may see a lot of the slides that may be similar from yesterday. So we're just going to start off with a webinar overview and of what
I'm going to
we're
bring that up right now.
Good morning. Good morning, everybody.
I wanted to say good morning to everyone.
That's lovely. That's lovely. It's all good. Yeah, so we're going to talk about from the family perspective, understanding addiction and trauma. We're going to look at the impact of addiction and trauma. So we're looking at it from a helper's perspective, but we're also looking at the impact that addiction and trauma has, for them, but also for us as well. We're going to be looking at family recovery at Sovereign and what that means. We're going to talk a little bit about the impact of COVID from the perspective of family and friends, and as well as where to go to get help. We're going to give an opportunity for questions and answers, and we're going to finish by leading you through a self-compassion practice that we did yesterday. That's super simple, but I find very, very, very effective in taking a moment to, be still and just kind of get back to some good things within ourselves when we're feeling overwhelmed. So what I want to say is just, even though we're going to have a time where we're going to, really open up and say, anybody have any questions or comments, you can start thinking about any questions or comments that you have now, and as we go through the presentation, you are more than welcome to start filling it in the chat, and we'll have a look at that, and we may answer it on the fly as we go, or we may save it till a little bit later if we get to another slide. But either way, we love the interaction with you, and we really do appreciate that.
I just wanted to mention, I know that there was a couple of emails sent to me yesterday requesting the slide deck. I figured I would wait just in case there are some individuals who joined yesterday and wanted to join today, so I could send them both. So if you didn't receive an email from me yesterday, it's just because if you would like this slide deck, it is a little bit different. There are some similarities, but I would be happy to send that to you as well later on today.
Great. Thanks, Evelina. And so also to start thinking about from your perspective, like whether you're a professional working with loved ones that are trying to support people with addiction issues, think about whether you're the professional or you're the loved one or you're the family member yourself. How has this COVID experience impacted you? To start thinking about that, and we'd love to hear from you. We'd like to hear about that so that we can have a discussion about it later on. So the slide on what is addiction. So, there are lots of different definitions about what addiction is. And this statement here that I'm going to read, addiction is a chronic, often relapsing brain disease that causes compulsive seeking and use, drug or alcohol seeking and use despite harmful consequences, I feel is addiction in a nutshell. And that this really speaks to the heart of what you often see or you experience when you love someone that has an addiction or you have an addiction yourself. I want to break it apart, but from the family's perspective. So when I use the word family, let me just say, I use family interchangeably with friends or the term concerned significant others, because to us, family is biological or non-biological concerned significant others. So please know that when I'm just using the word family, it's all encompassing as anyone who is concerned about somebody who loves somebody and or is concerned and wants to help somebody that has an addiction issue. So when we're looking at the idea of addiction as being chronic, what this means for family is that this is an ongoing issue. And a lot, as family will probably tell you, they'll probably nod and be like, yep, absolutely, it is an ongoing issue. They know that too well. But sometimes family, if this is in the beginning stages of coming to being aware that their loved one has an addiction, they might think, oh, I hope we can just nip it in the bud. I'm hoping that we can just do whatever has to be done, and then this could just be a part of their past and we could just move on. But unfortunately, developing an addiction is a process. It doesn't happen overnight. And so when we look at trying to transform it and be in recovery from it, it is also a process and does not occur overnight. So you have to realize that, and you'll notice probably through this webinar today that I'm going to use a lot of different analogies because I enjoy them, and I think sometimes they can really symbolically speak to things or make points and help us envision and concepts and ideas. But I think of, you know, the process of addiction and recovery as for the family is you're going to be running a marathon. And what that means is that you probably need training. You know, you need training to be able to run this marathon. But not only that, you also need to know how to pace yourself and take care of yourself when you're in the race so that you can actually finish without injury. Okay. So the whole process and message that I'm going to be giving today, other than some, you know, information about addiction and trauma, is also to understand what we need to do as family to be the most helpful to our loved one, and to how we're going to be helpful to ourselves and not lose ourselves in the process. So it is a chronic long-term issue, like that marathon that we're trying to run with our loved ones, and that we want to have the energy and the stamina to continue to encourage them, to assist them with maintaining their motivation and our motivation at the same time. It says here that it's an often relapsing brain disease that causes compulsive seeking, compulsive alcohol and drug seeking and use. So, you know, like I mentioned yesterday, you know, I'm not really going to get into a debate about whether you perceive addiction as a disease or not, because for me, we can still use the tools and the things that I'm going to teach you today, regardless of what you believe. I know for myself that perceiving addiction as a brain disease makes sense for me, because I know that the chemicals from alcohol and other drugs do reach brain tissue, do affect brain function. And I enjoy using the comparison with diabetes because I think it really speaks to it very well. And that if my pancreas wasn't working properly and my pancreas wasn't producing enough insulin, it would be malfunctioning, and it may become diseased in the fact that I have diabetes. And although it may not be curable, it's definitely treatable. And there's different types of interventions that you can do with someone who has diabetes. It might just be a change in diet and food without any medication. It may be oral medication. It may be insulin and injections, exercise program. And this is why we have, you know, diabetic nurses that give health teaching and coaching on how to live and be well with somebody that has a malfunctioning pancreas. So if we have a brain that isn't functioning properly, we're going to see difficulty in managing feelings. We're going to see high risk behavior and impulsive decision making and choices that don't always serve us well. And you say, you know, why is that? Why? I just don't understand how they can continue to make choices that are harming them. I just can't wrap my head around it. Well, this is why I feel that it speaks to the way chemicals, mood altering chemicals, manipulate brain function and our survival circuitry. Because drugs and alcohol, when you use them, the mind has certain chemicals, and the way it interacts reinforces more using, and it makes it you know, silently sends a message to the user that they need this substance for their survival. And, you know, when we think about things that make us feel good and give reinforcements in the natural world, like with food, you know, when we eat something, we get a reinforcement in our mind because, you know, we need food for our survival. So that is reinforced, and we may feel a compulsion when we're really hungry to have something to eat. And the same is true if we're really cold and we need something warm, or we feel lonely and we want to hold somebody. We get reinforcements from all those things. The sad thing is that, substances and man-made chemicals, or the way that, drugs are manipulated and they're formulated with all of these unnatural things, and then we ingest them, it creates such a strong reinforcement that it's greater than the reinforcement we get for food. And it's greater than the reinforcement we get when we hug somebody for a period of time. And so our brain kind of tricks us into thinking that this is the top, man. Like, this is essential for our survival, and addiction wants to be primary. Addiction is very selfish. It's by nature, because it wants to be number one above all else. And that's why it says here on the slide, you're using and you're doing this despite harmful consequences. And this is why we keep doing it. So when you are a family member and you're talking to your loved one, when I meet with family and we start talking about their interventions and the way they've tried to help people, it's very common that, like, I try and talk to them and I try and tell them, that it's not good for them, and look how it's hurting this, and look how it's hurting you, and look how it's impacting your kids, and look how it's impacting your job, and look at these legal issues you have. And you're trying to be rational and grounded and to help them see that. But the addicted mind is like, wants to avoid the truth of things and the pain. Addiction likes to escape and protect. So, you're trying to tell them this and you're trying to be rational, but the addicted mind is not rational. The addicted mind has one focus, and that's to use and get that reinforcement, and use and get that reinforcement, so that the person feels like they can actually function. And it's kind of backwards thinking, but this is the nature of addiction. And this is why it's so difficult for family. And so you're saying, well, if being rational with them and showing them all of the ways this is hurting, this is not really an effective strategy, what am I supposed to be doing? What is actually, what is actually going to help? And that's what I'm going to get into a little bit later. So I will come back to that for sure. We have a whole slide dedicated to that. So we have somebody here just sharing that they felt that, they were addicted to their ex-partner and their ex-husband, trying to, get them to seek help. And absolutely, because, and this is why we're talking about how addiction is a family disease and it's a family issue, because our lives as people who love the person that's struggling, our lives become preoccupied with the addiction. So here we have this train reaction of preoccupation. We have the people who are using the substance that are preoccupied with using. And then we have the family and the loved ones preoccupied with the person who's using the substances. And it's just this addiction train that happens. And so it makes a lot of sense for you to say that. And I can see how that would be really, really true for you. And I think it's actually a really common thing to happen. There are other types of addictions outside of just chemicals, although that's what I specialize in, is chemical dependency. But there's also addictions to gambling and to shopping and those kinds of things. And this bullet list that you see here, these are things that if you're considering helping somebody that has a substance abuse issue, but you really want to understand it, you have a sincere place in you that wants to understand it better and be genuinely helpful, these are some things that you can ask yourself, and that you can maybe even talk with them if you have that kind of relationship. So, what is their predisposition to having an addiction? Did this person that you care about grow up in a home where there was addiction? Or, like the second bullet says, the way in which the addiction developed, what was their exposure? What was the availability of drugs and alcohol to them, and at what age? What opportunity do they have? Were they encouraged to use to be a part of the family? These are all things that, you can think about to better understand how long the process has actually been in play in the development of an addiction. I do want to say, as a side note, if there's anybody in the room today that is a parent of a child that has an addiction, even if it's an adult child, and you yourself as the parent struggled with addiction, and your child grew up in a home where there was addiction, and then now they themselves are struggling with addiction, it's very, very, very common that you may feel guilt or responsibility. So for this, you may be saying to yourself, oh my gosh, I know why this happened because, I was drinking and now she's drinking, or so on and so on. But what I want you to know is that if you are in recovery today, or you've been in recovery for a while, yes, your child may have been exposed to the effects of growing up in a home of addiction. That may be true. But what is also true is that you've shown them recovery and you've shown them that change is possible. So those are other lessons that you've also shown your children. Okay. And coming to get help, and get services for yourself, and just to start this process of entering into this concept of family recovery, you can talk about the guilt you feel, but there's going to be a journey for you to start to learn where your responsibility stops and where their responsibility begins as far as taking care of themselves. Because at the end of the day, no matter what a person goes through in their life, we all have a responsibility to take care of ourselves. We cannot play the blame game forever. We have to at some point begin to self-manage our own lives. So we also can look at the way addiction is lived out in an individual's life, whether they're using daily, they're binging in isolation, and others. Now, why this is a slippery slope for some families is because, the individuals using might say like, Dad, come on, or Auntie, come on. It's not like I'm using it every day, man. Like I work hard and I party on the weekend. What's the big deal? And sometimes family will go, yeah, well, they have a point. They do work really hard and they just party on the weekend. And we can kind of go, oh, thank God it's just that, because if they really had a big problem, I don't know what I'd do about it. So we can actually get on board with minimizing and denying and avoiding the issue, because it is such an overwhelming idea to think that somebody might, actually have a serious problem with using chemicals. Because we as the family know that even though, despite our best attempts at maybe trying to control the addiction, we truly are powerless to it. And that's a scary concept to kind of wrap our heads around. So we want to be careful of that. Also, we can look at, what substances they're using, whether they're using stimulants, or depressants or hallucinogens. And I have a kind of a cautionary note here that I want to share with concerned significant others or family and loved ones, is that your loved one may have told you that, their drug of choice is a stimulant, for example. However, they may not tell you all the substances that they're doing. They may just tell you the one that they have a major problem with, or the one that you have found out that they're using. But many people that use substances often use a mix of substances to balance themselves out. So if I'm using stimulants all day to keep up with whatever I do in my day and to function, I might use an opiate or some type of depressant at night to balance myself out so that I can actually sleep and then get up and use stimulants. So I'm using these chemical cocktails in order to actually manage my energy. So the danger in that is that when people are using substances, even certain substances can look like other substances. So I'm buying something illegal that I think is my stimulant drug of choice. What I don't know is there's a very potent opiate mixed with it, and I didn't know. So there is danger in using always, especially if it's illegal, and depending on the degree of recklessness as well of the person who is using. But I don't want families to assume that, their loved one couldn't be using anything else. I think a safer assumption is my loved one has an addiction, and I am going to make sure that I have what I need in order to respond to a crisis situation, such as a naloxone kit or a Narcan kit. So when we talk about naloxone or Narcan, these are kits that you can get for free. You can contact your local health unit, or you can go to your local pharmacy and you can say, I need training and a naloxone kit, and they will give it to you. And this kit, what it does is it has medicine inside that helps reverse the effects of an opiate overdose. So when I talk about opiates, we're talking about Percocet, Oxycontin, Dilaudid, morphine, heroin, fentanyl. These are all versions of opiates. And so if your loved one is accidentally exposed to an opiate, or accidentally ingest something they thought was something else, and you find them and they're unresponsive, you have the option, because you have this kit, to try the kit to see if that will reverse it while you're calling 911 and EMS and all those things. And I know that it is a very sensitive topic and that it's hard to talk about, but these are the conversations as family that we have to have when we love somebody that has an addiction, and if we really have a sincere desire to be helpful. And the consequences from using is another thing we got to look at. Some people, they may not have similar consequences than others. Don't compare your loved one to another one. You might say, oh, my Uncle Joe was an alcoholic, and my son, yeah, he's a drinker, but he's nothing like my Uncle Joe, so he doesn't have a problem. That may not be true. Okay. So just because Uncle Joe had all of these consequences associated with his drinking, and maybe your son is more high functioning or out of state in his addiction where he's not having the same consequences, it doesn't mean that he doesn't or shouldn't look at his relationship with alcohol. We can't assume that because one addiction doesn't match as another, that we're all good here. We just need to have these conversations. So just to kind of keep that in mind. And the last point is extremely important. This is the path of healing that a person takes to overcome addictive behavior is different from each other. Your path of healing as a family member may be different than another family's journey. And we have to compare ourselves to ourselves, and we also have to allow our loved ones to have some decision making in how they get well. And a lot of family, when I talk to them about that, their instant reaction is they can't even manage their own life, and I'm supposed to just let them choose how they're going to get well. Like they can't, they need to do this, and this is what they need to do, and that's final. And most of the time, what I hear from family is my loved one needs to be in residential facility. This is where they need to be. And until they can be in that facility, I'm not going to be okay, and they're not going to be okay. What I say to that is, you may be right in that they do need residential, and that they do need that level of intensity and intervention. Is the most intense type of help we offer is residential. And they may need that. And yes, you probably will feel a sense of relief. I can't tell you how many times I've heard families say to me, they're in treatment, and now, you know what? I'm not looking at my phone all the time. I actually had the first good night's sleep in months because I knew that they weren't on the street, or I knew that they weren't out using. I knew that they were somewhere safe getting help. That is extremely common. So sometimes the desire for our, to steer our loved ones into one direction comes from a really good place, but it also comes from a place where we're seeking relief ourselves, right? And what I want to say to you is, it's okay to have those discussions. It's okay to encourage them to consider residential treatment, especially if this has been a long journey for the person. But you also want to open up the options that they have for different types of help before they go, and to encourage that recovery can start today, that recovery doesn't have to start when they get into a residential facility. Because sometimes when we have that attitude, then people that have a relationship with using want to do their big last party or one last hurrah, and they can get really reckless in anticipation of abstinence and not having their substance of choice. So we want to make sure that we kind of are talking with them in a way that helps them think outside of that and say, there's lots of options. What would you like to do? Would you like to go to some 12-step meetings while you wait? There's that choice. Or there's an alternative to 12-step called Smart Recovery. You could do something like that. You could do it online. You could do it in person. Maybe you could do some outpatient. Maybe you could do some virtual. Maybe you just want to do one-on-one. Oh, you don't want to address your addiction? I noticed you struggle a lot with anger. Would you like to talk to somebody about your anger? It's all related. The addiction, the undercurrents, it's all connected. So giving them choices is going to equal motivation. People don't like to be told what to do. You have to do this or you have to do that. When you present a person with some options, not only does it usually result in a motivation because they feel like they're self-directing their own life, and they're starting to feel like responsible adults. And yes, this decision I want to make, but they're usually picking things that they're actually willing to do on some level, more willing than the other things you might think is a better option. just get them to do something, because what's going to happen is they're going to start trying recovery and change on for size before they get to residential treatment. And not only that, they're going to start forming relationships with treatment providers and helpers. And that's a beautiful thing, because then they'll have those connections before they go to treatment, and they'll have them to return to, right? So there is value in making sure that you're giving them lots of options and choices. And I know that our health unit here in Windsor, if you go onto their website and you search in substance use, and you look under the health category, there is an amazing list of resources of all of the places that a person can go for help, and different types of help: faith-based, not faith-based, addiction medicine, not addiction medicine. Like, there's so many options, and it's all in one place. You could even direct them to that and says, share a link with that through a text and say, have a look. Does anything appeal to you? Right? So just starting to think about giving choices and letting them start to feel what it's like to self-manage their own recovery, even though it's scary for us.
Thanks, Cynthia. I wanted to mention I do have that list in that Google Drive. So
Yay.
at the end, I'll share it to the chat. I've been having trouble seeing the chat. So if you don't mind,
Oh, sure.
just keeping me up to date if there's anything, and interrupting me if there's any questions.
Yeah. I'll just, while you change the slide, I'll just read a little bit about, some things that were said here. Someone saying, the participant that was talking about feeling addicted to, getting her ex-husband help, also said the good news is that I've reached out to many agencies in Windsor and I've gotten stabilized, safe, and healthy for herself and her son. And so that there really is hope. And thank you for sending that message as someone with lived experience and supporting someone that has an addiction, that there is absolutely hope, because we can get very hopeless very quickly. The other thing is, someone else shared, that is what happened in my household, and I'm not the parent, but I'm one of the children of my household. And I think they were talking about, when I was sharing about growing up in a home where there is active addiction, and then getting sober later, and then the children growing up and maybe having their own journey with addiction. So I think that's when she had mentioned that. And, and someone else found this talk very powerful. Thank you for that feedback. I really appreciate that.
Thank you. And I'm just bringing up the resources so I can just share with everyone. And I'll also add, I had to stop sharing my screen to see the chat.
Sure.
And the resource that you mentioned from the WeChew, the health unit, that with all those
Yes.
where to go for help.
Yes.
Oops, I just sent it to someone privately by accident. There it is. Resources. Okay. And this is also where the slides will be found once I upload them. So please just copy and paste that link, and then you'll be able to find the slides later. So I'll start sharing my screen. Just wanted to mention that before I forget. So the next slide really is more about statistics. This is from the World Health Organization, because we're going to talk about the impact of addiction and trauma. So like, what do the stats? So over 73 million people, they're saying, have alcohol use disorder. 15 million people worldwide have some sort of drug use disorder. So when we talk about disorders, that's something that could be quantified and measured. And a lot of people may use alcohol, but they may not have an alcohol use disorder. So there's a difference between that. So I want to focus on the actual disorders that they could actually measure. 1/3 of the world's population over the age 15 smoke tobacco, and that does not include vaping. So I think it would be a little bit higher than that. Gambling is growing in popularity. And I guess in 2004, that's a little bit of a dated statistic, but roughly $12.4 billion was spent on some form of government-run gambling activity in Canada. And roughly 100,000 people in Ontario are experiencing problems as a result of gambling. I'm hearing it more often just from talking in social circles of experiences with families and individuals going through problems because of gambling. I'm hearing it more often now, personally, and it's anecdotal, but I don't know about you, Cynthia, but I'm thinks about gambling or gaming addiction or some sort of experience like that, right?
Yeah. I like that you bring in the gambling stats, because with substance use, there's always the risk of cross addiction. And what I mean by that is, your loved one may have overcome a chemical addiction to drugs or alcohol, but then later didn't really do any of the work of the underlying issues that, was part of the development of an addictive lifestyle to begin with. And then they transfer that addictive behavior onto something else like gambling. So it's actually quite common to work with families whose children have, are cross addicted and have multiple types of addictions going on. Yeah.
Absolutely. This slide just talks about some myths about drug abuse and addiction. So you may have heard this myth, overcoming addiction is simply a matter of willpower. You can stop using drugs if you really want to. But as Cynthia mentioned, the way we perceive or the way our brain processes, when we talk to an individual rationally, that's, to try to get through to them and to see the consequences of their actions, they're coming from a part of their mind that is not the prefrontal cortex where they're thinking rationally. They're thinking survival. They're thinking, I need to do this because I need this reinforcement. And prolonged exposure to drugs alters the brain in that result. So that craving, the compulsion to use overrides. Just think about when you're in survival mode. If someone's trying, or say something is chasing you, or you have to run, right? Like you get adrenaline, you start running, you have anxiety, maybe you're stressed, you just get jittery. Like your body has a physiological response, and it's hard to think rationally. It's hard to make good decisions in those moments because it's reactive. So just imagine someone who is addicted is coming from that reactive, that survival place, and all they do is they want to just use. So willpower won't do that, because I feel like willpower has a lot more to do with discipline. And someone might be motivated at first, but then discipline, I think, comes from our logical part of our brain, our rational part of our brain, where we have to really plan and work through things, right?
And just to piggyback on top of that, Evelina, if for family members, just think about how difficult it can be sometimes to not raise your voice. You're upset with their behavior. Your loved one has done something, or arrived late again, or didn't follow through, or has used, or what have you, and you're so angry, and you're not using substances, and you want to be calm, but you find yourself yelling and just being so angry, and you're not even using, and you're having that difficulty with being able to self-regulate. And so add an addiction onto that, where there's actually a physiological impact onto the brain by all outside sources and substances, it just compounds the difficulty.
Absolutely. Like a good example is like driving and someone cuts you off or something, and not really,
Yeah.
okay, I'm gonna let that go, or something like that. Absolutely. Right. So myth number 2, addiction is a disease. There's nothing you can do about it. Well, what about diabetes, right? You can treat it. There's medications. You could talk to a health specialist. You can do specific therapy for diabetes. There's treatments. Same with addiction. Most experts do agree that it's a brain disease. So obviously there's changes, physiological, chemical changes in the brain. But that doesn't mean we have to be a helpless victim. And there is treatment for addiction. So there is hope, because there is treatment. If there was no treatment, that'd be a lot different. But there's and it does take time too. Just like if you had any sort of disease or illness that you're dealing with, just having time to treat that. And I think Cynthia will go more into exactly how that looks later. You mentioned this too, Cynthia, yesterday, that addicts have to hit rock bottom before they get better. And like you said, even if someone is going to residential treatment or starting some kind of treatment program, recovery can begin today. Recovery can begin at any point of the process. I think that's why a lot of policies focus on youth, because like they really hope that, you get younger people starting the recovery process earlier, because it's the longer it is, the more prolonged it is without treatment, the harder it is to treat, right? So the earlier the better. But that doesn't mean there's no hope of treatment, of improvement, of recovery. It's just a little bit more difficult, right?
And just to clarify, addicts having to hit rock bottom before they get better is a myth. Okay.
Exactly.
This is what we were talking about yesterday. Sometimes we hear that. That's a very common thing that we hear, and that I hear, from family. They'll say, well, I guess they haven't hit rock bottom. No, the reason why people say that is because the way that chemicals hijack the brain and the way that chemicals reinforce that compulsive behavior to seek out the substance, that it often takes quite a big consequence to almost shake and interrupt the pattern. That's why. And so it doesn't necessarily mean that they have to hit bottom, because there are strategies you can do to help support and motivate and keep the conversation going in a helpful way instead of breaking it down through conflict. And we'll talk about that later. But there are other strategies that you can use to motivate them so they don't have to have more suffering in order to actually get well. But this is why it typically takes a big consequence, is because of the powerful effect that substances have on the actual structure and functioning of the brain. And our brain is what is responsible for our decision making, right? So
Yeah, for sure. And Cynthia,
yeah.
the thing you mentioned yesterday is like the person could really want to change. Let's say the example of stop drinking, and they have a meeting with like someone to go over that, or a 12 step that they don't show. They can, that radical, that the dialectical experience of being two things at once, right? But
Yes.
addiction overriding, you could want to get help, you could want recovery.
A lot of times, because addiction is so irrational, and that when people aren't impacted by it, like as far as living with it themselves, it can just be something that blows our mind. We're looking at it and we're just like, this is insane. This is absolute insanity. What is happening? What is going on? It's very common for family, to feel that way. But what I want you to know is that from the person's experience with addiction, they can not want to be doing this and want to do it. There's this internal conflict of those two truths that appear to be opposite, but actually coexisting at the same time. And I've spoken with people that have talked to me about using and crying while they're using because they hate themselves so much that they continue to do this. Now, if that doesn't really speak to that internal conflict, it's heartbreaking. And, once we get really educated about addiction and what's really helpful in the process of recovery, we can start making room, in maybe a resentful heart, maybe more of a compassionate heart. And hopefully, that's the goal, because a compassionate heart, it serves everybody well.
Thanks, Cynthia.
Yeah.
Can't force someone into treatment. They want to want help. It doesn't have to be voluntary to be successful. Obviously, if the individual wants to be there, I think that's something. I think anyone, being forced into something, as Cynthia mentioned, that's hard. There might be a little more challenges or barriers, but eventually, that person, if they're staying in recovery, they have supports. That attitude of not wanting to be there or resisting may change. So just because someone is kind of told that they have to be there, if it's involuntary through an employer or family or legal system, doesn't mean it's not going to work. It still has an opportunity to work because that person is still there or still.
I want to underline what you're saying, Evelina, because it is a super, super important point for family. A person doesn't have to, want to go or be in treatment for it to be successful. Okay. And I'm going to tell you, as somebody who worked in residential treatment for years, there was a lot of people who came into residential treatment that did not want to be there. But what I would say, because there were other people who really wanted to be there, and even the other people that were serious about wanting to be there for the right reason, they would get annoyed. They would get annoyed that there were other people with addiction issues that didn't want to be there. And they felt like they were even saying, if you're not here for the right reasons, you shouldn't be here. And I would have to interject and say, no, we're not going to do that. It doesn't matter to me what got you in through the doors. What I want to focus on is, in your journey here, does your desire for change, instead of being from these external pressures, does your desire to change start to shift and become something maybe you actually want for you? And I cannot tell you how many times a person came into residential treatment and came in because they were trying to appease a parent, probation, CAS, an employer, somebody else. And somewhere along the line, through getting access to regular support and encouragement and the education, a shift occurred. And then they started to feel afraid because they said, wow, I think I actually want this. Wow, I actually need to change. And now I just don't have enough time here left. And what am I going to do? And so they start to get that fire within them to want different. And we can work with that. So please, if you are family, if they're struggling and they're saying, I don't want treatment, this and that, start implementing lots of choice options for them and just get them to start trying different things on for size and not give up on that, and encourage them to have that idea that, yeah, maybe you don't want to do this for yourself. Would you consider doing it for me? Would you go try this group out for me then, if you don't want to do it for yourself? I know that's not going to maintain their change if they don't end up wanting to do it for themselves. But if it's the kind of like the catalyst or the springboard that gets them exposed and connected, so be it. That's what I say.
Thanks, Cynthia. And I think you're going to go over this later in strategies, but there is a question in the chat stating anything that can be done to help you an addicted loved one who claims to enjoy using. And I just wanted, the first thing I thought of is, of course, at the beginning, first of all, it's a way to cope, and it works. It's effective, right? It's effective, and a lot of individuals enjoy it, right? They enjoy certain aspects of it. And even if they start starts losing its whatever moment of like enjoying it, it becomes a habit then. So the longer somebody continues to use it, becomes a habit, then maybe they stop enjoying it, or they claim that to continue to enjoy it. So that's the thing. It's an effective coping strategy. So
I'll offer a strategy right now in regards to that. And it depends on your relationship with the person. So if you have a very trusting and kind of open relationship about their addiction issues with the person, you may even say, you know what, let's have a seat. I want you to tell me all the things that you love about using, and get them. It relaxes me. It this, it that, and just write down the list. Is there anything else you can think of? No, that's about it. Well, that list are all the things they don't know how to do sober.
Mm-hmm.
So now you know where they have to build their skills. So you can start supporting them and thinking, well, you really like to relax. Let's think about things that we can do that don't involve using, that make you feel relaxed. I know they're not going to make you feel as relaxed, because chemicals are very powerful in the way they hijack and take over our body and do the work for us. But if you like to relax, like say, well, I do find it relaxing, doing a massage. You might say, well, you know what? If you decide, and this, we're going to talk about reinforcement later, but this is part of a strategy that I'm going to address. But you say, well, you know what? I'll make you a deal. If you're willing to go to get your assessment done, I will pay for you to go to 2 massages this month. And then you're reinforcing the positive recovery behavior and things that you want more of, and you're using a reinforcement and exposing them to other ways to feel relaxed that don't have to do with using. So if you're not very close with that person and they're just sharing with you, I enjoy using, I like this, I like that, you might go, well, what do you like about it? You might just have a verbal conversation about it, pick up on a few things, and use the same strategy. I know this doesn't compare, but would you like to do this? I know that you like feeling this way. Maybe we could do this together instead of you using on Saturday. Can we try this? And start getting them to think outside of substances as the only solution to give them those feelings that they're looking for and what they enjoy.
And a part of that may be the social aspect. Maybe they like being with others. And it's like, well, my friends, do it, or, that's part of my circle. And so it's them, and, all these things. So absolutely, what Cynthia suggested, a great idea. What works? And I said, it's effective coping. So what is it that makes it so effective, right? And the last myth is treatment didn't work before, so there's no point of trying again. If you're alive, you have a pulse, and you keep going and keep trying, like that's, it's not a failure. If you're in recovery, so Cynthia talked a little bit about yesterday of the spirals of addiction and recovery. We're on a spectrum of everything. So the spectrum of recovery It's like we have to have a lot of supports around us at first. It's difficult. It's different. It's hard to change, to make changes, right? That's why we need a lot of supports. I mean, if we relapse, doesn't mean we failed. Doesn't mean it's over. That just means maybe we have to take a look at what maybe something needs to change, or some we need some extra supports, or adjusting something, right?
Mhm. I have a
Yeah.
very important point I'd like to bring up about, going back to treatment. There's two perspectives here. So the one is sometimes there's families like, oh, my loved one relapsed, they need to go back to residential. And and then you have the other perspective where the loved one might be saying, oh, I relapsed, I need to go back to residential. Well, from the family member's perspective, and even from the loved one's perspective that keeps feeling like residential treatment is the solution every time there's a relapse, if a person was able to successfully go through a treatment program without using, and they were able to successfully complete that, in the right place, doing the right thing, at the right time with the right people, all that, and they were able to be successful, then they obviously have some skill because they didn't abandon the process, right? But what happens is they get into their environment and they don't recreate what worked for them in treatment, and they get back into their patterns, and then they relapse. They think, I obviously didn't learn something, or I obviously, and sometimes family think this too. Obviously it didn't work for you, or you didn't get enough out of it. That's not necessarily the truth. I'm not saying it can't be true, but more often than not, what you'll find is that people aren't relapsing because they forgot what they learned in treatment. People are relapsing because they're having a problem applying the knowledge that they did learn in treatment. So is the solution really about needing to go back into residential, or is the solution about accessing outpatient services to learn how to take the knowledge you learned, apply it in your environment so that you can be successful, instead of trying to escape your environment that you think is the problem and living in a bubble in treatment for a while and coming out and trying to give it a good go again? We have to start thinking about the process of the healing journey a little bit differently, I think.
And the you think about the lack of sometimes transition for individuals being in residential and then going back home. There's no transition of being able to practice or apply those skills. It's just right away. It's like, I got to do this, and that's a lot to put on a person.
There's a lot of pressure.
A lot of
When
pressure. Right?
when you talk about pressure, for those that have, just for the family to appreciate, not only is there a pressure to heal the addiction, there may be a pressure to heal the trauma. There may be a pressure to catch up to their peers because they feel so behind. There may be a pressure to not mess up and to please their loved ones and never to relapse. There's a pressure involved in having cravings and, not being able to, sorry, I got distracted by the chat for a second.
That's okay.
And just a pressure to manage cravings. There's a tremendous amount of pressure in early recovery. So you're right, having more transitional support and maybe even step down programs that are, dry houses and things like that is usually what they're called, what we tend to call them. And safe, sober living environments are probably would be a lovely, thing that would be beneficial to our community. There just isn't enough of them. I totally agree.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Yeah.
And what the chat someone mentioned uh, about it'd be great if we could hold public seminars for people to get educated about and have open discussion to reach a larger population. Public seminars like face to face might be a little bit challenging right now just because of our restrictions with coming together. That's kind of why we wanted to do this virtually. But I mean, if there's interest, I think maybe we can continue having more of these, or having open more discussions up, because I know these are educational right now. So it doesn't give as many opportunities for discussion, but absolutely, maybe.
Yeah. Or direct them to this webinar, and
Exactly.
they can take, that would be helpful in and of itself. So yeah.
Like self-learning, right?
Yep.
So the next part, I'd like to just talk about a little bit and go over briefly is trauma, because there is a connection between trauma and addiction. So what Tara Brock talked about, and gave this definition in her own words is that trauma is when we have encountered an out of control, frightening experience that has disconnected us from all sense of resourcefulness or safety or love. So imagine this where you feel no control or ability to be resourceful in that situation or cope or detach from that situation and having an inability to manage that situation uh, to the point where it's ingrained in our memory, in our emotions. It's something that's stayed with us, right? So,
Um,
Cynthia, I
yeah.
would love it if you could talk about the different types of.
Oh, you want me to talk about the different types of suffering?
If you don't, or yeah, is that what
Okay. Yeah. No, I'll hit on that
I
just
think it's
briefly.
important.
It is important. It absolutely is important because I feel that, having that conversation also speaks to the family. And I'm going to, bridge to that in a second. But what we were mentioning yesterday when we were talking about trauma is that, it's helpful to think of trauma that there's two types of trauma. There's, natural suffering and trauma that occurs as a result of just living a human experience. Like, we're all subjected to illness. We may all be impacted by natural disasters, earthquakes, tornadoes, hurricanes, those kinds of things, floods, and that could be very traumatizing and sudden and unexpected. Also, pain is a natural part of the human experience. Losing loved ones to death or pets to death, that is a natural part of the human experience that we're all subjected to be vulnerable to. And so there's a natural type of suffering that comes along that can result in some trauma in the human experience. But there's also a different type of suffering, and that's what we would call created suffering. And this is the kind of suffering that a person decides to bring onto another person in the world in the form of abuse or some type of criminal act like a mugging or a robbery or a break-in or something like that. So there's those kind of created suffering experiences. And what's very, very difficult to cope with mentally and emotionally is that oftentimes the created suffering we experience is by people that are supposed to love and protect us, or people that are supposed to care about us and not betray us. And so from the family's perspective of loving somebody that has an addiction, oftentimes we can find ourselves having a traumatic experience, and we can find ourselves having signs and symptoms of the impact of trauma just in watching and witnessing another person's addiction. It could be seeing a loved one's seizure for the first time when they haven't drank in a few days. It could be and not ever seeing somebody's seizure before, and that can be a very scary thing to witness.
And that's like because there's different types of trauma when we talk about like definitions. So what Cynthia's talking about is either vicarious trauma or secondary trauma, or even experiencing that yourself, but it may be happening to someone else, or hearing about the traumatic event that might have happened to someone, and feeling those emotions about that experience, right? And individuals that do use substances or are addicted to something often are re-traumatized because they put themselves in dangerous situations, and
Yeah.
and then in terms of their safety, and then your safety as a family member, because it's hard to feel safe around someone who's not always making choices that are safest for them either.
Yeah. And sadly, it can produce a lot of feelings of hypervigilance. And by hypervigilance, we mean feeling on edge, feeling jumpy. I cannot tell you how many family members talk to me about jumping when their phone goes off, when their text message or their phone calls, because they're just waiting for the next crisis.
That
That is,
anticipatory
yes,
anxiety. So say your phone's
yes,
on the thing and you're just like staring at it like something's coming. Like
yes.
that experience, you're anticipating to get a bad message about something that's happened.
Yes, that is super, super common and extremely stressful. And it disrupts your sense of self, your sense of sleep, your sense of balance, your emotions. You feel drained, you feel exhausted. It's really, really common. And so when people say, what do I need help for? I'm not the one with the addiction. It just, we have to get honest about the fact that we are not robots. We are human beings, and human beings have emotional experiences. And when we love somebody who is repeatedly putting themselves at risk, or repeatedly putting themselves in danger, or maybe even putting us in danger, because now the people that they owe money to are coming around our house or calling us, or whatever the situation is, it could be very traumatizing. It could be very, very, very difficult. So I don't want you to downplay yourself and what your needs might be, because you're like, I'm not the one with the problem, quote unquote.
And it's difficult when we're involved in where we care for someone, we're trying to be supportive, we're trying to, give them the best support possible, and like it's like that analogy with the airplane. It's like you have to put the mask on yourself and then give it to someone else. It's very important that you do care for yourself, and not completely get into everything that's happening with them. But it's very hard to separate those things, especially if you care about someone. So when we talk about compassion for the other person, it's also very important that we practice self-compassion. Checking with ourselves of how we're feeling, being compassionate towards yourself. Yeah, like maybe I just spent the last hour thinking about and saying what ifs and doing all this, and I don't know what's going to happen. I don't have any control of it, and it's like affecting my relationships maybe with other people. Harder on yourself because you're experiencing something also that's very worrisome to you, to your family, if you are in that situation, right? So it's hard. It's like people are hard on themselves, knowing, like, when we talk about the word enabling, or how do you know when to cut the person off, or like that, be that support or not be that support. And that's why direction is important, and that's why I think what Cynthia does is important, because families need to be embraced with supports as well, and hopefully they don't feel like they're by themselves.
Yeah.
So,
I just want to go to the chat, Evelina, and just say
sure.
that, someone here is saying that sometimes that feeling that you get as family is a sick, intuitive feeling.
Yes, I did see that. I'm able to access the chat
right.
now.
Oh, okay. I'm just helping out.
Sorry, no, Cynthia, I forgot to mention that when I stopped sharing my screen, I started.
That's cool. That's good. And one of our participants that was saying that they were impacted by a loved one's addiction, that they have a message that if there is anyone that is suffering in addiction, or as a family member, that it is very, very difficult. It's super hard to understand, but please reach out for help. It is the best thing that they ever did for their son and their self. And unfortunately, their loved one did not come out of addiction, but this is key. And they say yet, right? Keeping the hope there, but that we are living life again. And that is such an important message that it seems almost impossible, because I think what people sometimes do is they say, if I stop this obsessive worry, if I stop the obsessive worry, if I stop obsessing over where they are, what they're doing, or trying to control the addiction, something's going to happen and it's going to be my fault. So it's like this internal message that you're giving yourself, even if you're not aware of it. And the other thing that people often say to themselves is, if I love them, then I would be obsessively worrying, because I mush together this idea that worry equals care. And what I can tell you is that worry burns us out, and that you can still care and still have a life. Having your own life, having boundaries, and taking care of yourself doesn't mean you don't care. But people, especially parents, mush those things together.
And
we have to learn to tease them
guilt
apart.
and the guilt.
Yes.
The guilt and feeling like you have to be the protector. But like Cynthia mentioned, there is a certain point, they have support, but we do have to take care of ourselves. And also there's a point where we kind of let them make their own choices as well, but knowing that we're supportive of them. But it's a ballet. It's a ballet of everyday kind of decisions, choices, and just ensuring that we are taking care of themselves. So I do have a couple tips, I guess, in terms of using a trauma-informed. What am I talking about? So how do we change our language to speak with someone who has experienced trauma, or how does trauma connect to the ACE and toxic stress? So adverse childhood events or experiences are the aces in that sentence. So the TED Talk at the bottom left here, there's Nadine Burke Harris. There's a TED Talk that talks about childhood trauma affects health across a lifetime. And she did research, she's a pediatrician, about certain events that individuals experience often as children have impacts on their physical health, the way of, and their mental health in the future. And sometimes those individuals will use forms of coping, which become problems like addictions later on in life, but not necessarily. But so it's very interesting. I suggest you check it out. I'll see if I can get the link sent to you or added to that Google Drive. I know the privacy settings need to be changed, so I'll make sure to do that. I recommend you check it out because it's correlated. Like a lot of individuals that go into treatment or have been struggling with addiction have had some sort of adverse childhood events happen during their lifetime. So trauma care is literally characterized by the understanding that problematic behaviors may need to be treated as a result of their ACE scores, or other traumatic experiences someone had. So you're literally looking at it through, okay, why is this person reacting this way? What's wrong with you? Why are you yelling? Why are you reacting like this, right? Why are you choosing to do those behaviors? They're coming from trauma changes the brain. So before we even talk about addictions and substances, I'm saying that the way a person sees the world is not a safe place. That their attachments and trust to other people are not always secure. Those things have an effect on their current relationships, have an effect on the way they see others and how they behave. So if someone behaves in a way that doesn't align maybe with how come you don't feel safe right now? Why are you acting this way? Maybe they don't, but it's hard to understand it if you don't look at it from a trauma perspective of maybe why, because they're on survival mode. They're more working from their survival part of their mind, where they're always more reactive because they have to be, because that's the way their body has changed. So the HPA axis, which is basically linked to your parasympathetic nerve system, so your hormones, your pituitary gland, adrenals, how you react to situations of stress, is how that person is literally reacting or experiencing most of the time. So if you feel that way, it makes sense that some people want to cope with substances because they're effective immediately, usually. But over the long term, that's just not helpful, right? Eventually. So when we talk about framing a frame of reference of asking a person, like oftentimes we might say, what is wrong with you? Why are you doing this? Stop it, like snap out of it. Maybe changing that to what has happened to you. What has happened to you that you feel like, you're not safe? Or what has happened that is making you feel this way right now?
Mhm.
And you know what? That conversation may take some time. And we maybe need to be a bit patient with them because they may still continue to react, right? But once they realize they're safe, once they realize that everything is okay, they'll be able to access their prefrontal cortex and actually talk and process some of those experiences and emotions that just occurred, right? And allowing space for that person to even do that instead of pushing them away and reinforcing that you are alone or that you have to figure it out yourself or like I don't want to hear it is important. So we want to create spaces where they're able to kind of experience that and maybe learn how to and in treatment that's kind of sometimes what happens if there's a treatment that person goes to like a residential or a virtual. You learn a lot about responding rather than reacting, right? Taking that moment, even with anger, like Cynthia mentioned, taking 5 minutes or 5 minutes, taking 5 seconds, 10 seconds to breathe or to count before you respond to something. That's retraining our minds to not be so reactive, right? And some statistics, 56% of general adult population report at least one traumatic event, and 90% of mental health clients have been exposed to one or more experiences of trauma. And also those who have mental health issues or have experienced trauma are more likely to become victims of trauma or violence or negative experiences in the future. So they're less likely to actually victimize others are more likely to be victims of those things.
So I just wanted to go to the chat for a second. We have somebody that posted a link to a free online training on being trauma informed. And so that for if you are, even if you're just, if you work in the field, if you're a professional and you're looking to approach things from a more trauma informed perspective, or you as a family member are very interested in learning more about trauma in general because your loved one may or has been through something traumatic. And we also have somebody sharing how accurate they're finding this, because they said that they were actually diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder 14 years ago from a violent incident that was actually a result because of a loved one's addictive lifestyle, and that it impacted every aspect of their life. So thank you for validating that and sharing that. We may know this from our perspective because we deal with it on a regular basis, but it's very helpful when people who are participating in these things nod and say, yes, this does occur. So thank you for that. That's valuable. So just for, just trying to be mindful of the time, this slide and the other slide where I talk about family recovery are quite full. And so I do want to get through them because there's a lot of really good information here. But as far as questions and answers, what I'd like to do is continue with what we've been doing, and people just feeling like they can ask a question in the middle of what we're saying and we'll get to it and that kind of stuff, and keep it kind of interactive that way. That would be helpful in when we're considering the time that we have left here together. So when I talked about, in the webinar overview about the rippling impact of addiction and trauma, this is not a complete list. There may be things on here that you have experienced that I'm not touching on. What is listed here are the things that I see overwhelmingly and on a regular basis. And so the first thing here is, how does addiction impact concerned significant others, right? Well, the family, the friends, the loved ones, often we feel concerned. We talked about worry already, but feeling concerned about the way that substances are impacting their loved one's life, either mentally, physically, through work, through school. But not only that, but I think part of the worry and what is really fueled in it is, yes, around safety issues, but part of the worry too is about your loved one's reputation. And I don't know if that's talked about a lot in conversation with people, or people really realize that, but I think we get really concerned about our loved one's reputation, that they're going to get a bad reputation at work and be unemployable, or they're going to get a bad reputation among our own family members because they're not behaving themselves or they're acting out of control when they drink at social functions. So we start to get worried about their reputation for them. And not only that, we start to worry about them wasting what we perceive as potential. So our loved ones, we see so much potential in them, and we know how smart they are, and we know how talented they are because we know them outside of their addiction as well, where people who may be strangers to them maybe only know them because of their addictive behavior. But we see past that, and so it's really hard when you love somebody to watch them do this in their own life, because we see the potential that's being missed here. So there's concern. Secondly, safety concerns. Huge, right? Not only concerned about their safety for some of the reasons we talked about, whether they're hooking up with questionable characters and their safety's at risk every time they go and get what they need, safety at risk regarding whether they're going to use to the point of physical consequence, illness, overdose, things like that. Also, safety concerns for ourselves. Who's coming over to our house if they live with us? Who's that knocking at the door at this hour? So concerned about ourselves, and not even just from other people, but from the loved one with the addiction. I am seeing a lot of parents in abusive relationships with their children, and they are the ones being abused. They're being abused sometimes emotionally, they're being abused mentally, they're being abused by using children. So if you don't do what I say, and I know you're taking care of my child right now, but I'll never let you see them again if you don't allow me to do X, Y, and Z. I'll just take them and go. And now we're concerned about our grandchild, and we're concerned about our loved one, and and there's all this concern and safety issues. And sometimes we are at, not just being abused mentally, but sometimes there's physical abuse happening. We're dealing with our loved one, and they're coming home and they're under the influence, and maybe there's an argument that takes place, and we're pushed, or something even greater. um, so there's all sorts of ways, and sometimes parents don't like to um, really call this behavior what it is, and they'll say, stop acting crazy, you're out of control. Where what I coach my family to do is to mirror back to their loved one the reality of what they're doing. And so instead of stop acting crazy or knock it off, we say, it is not appropriate for you to be verbally abusing me. Physical abuse is not acceptable. Financial abuse and manipulating me out of money and lying to me about why you need money is not acceptable. And we start mirroring back for them the reality of their behavior, as opposed to using minimizing language because we don't really like the reality of our situation. So we've got these safety concerns. We may have CAS involvement because of what I mentioned earlier. We're caring for the children to prevent them from being in a foster care system. So we're acting as what we would call a kinship placement, and we're caring for the children, and there's the stress of all of that, or other types of criminal justice involvement. And our loved ones are asking for us to be their surety, and we already have trust issues with them, and we're not sure if we want to do that. And it can create a really difficult dynamic between the two of you. Also, you might be experiencing a lot of financial strain from having to take off time from work yourself in order to be there to help this person, or financial strain because you're giving them money for bailouts, quote unquote. You may be feeling overwhelmed, and so overwhelmed that you just kind of get on the same track as minimizing and denying the problem because you can't possibly handle anymore. You may find that the increased stress, there's increased significant stress in your life because of the unpredictability that addiction brings with it. There's a lot of unpredictability and not being able to guarantee what's going to happen one day to the next. So that produces a lot of stress. And then increase in relationship conflict because there may be theft, broken promises, other types of betrayals. And so that can create a lot of conflict. And she just changed this again. And the last two, one is increasing feelings of hopelessness and helplessness. A lot of family members feel very alone in this journey because, again, they don't really want to tell people too much about it because they just kind of are hoping the person gets over it. Because if they tell the family, they're worried about how the family is going to judge their loved one, or if they're going to start telling that they're going to start telling them, you should be doing this or that. Or if I was their mother, I would be doing this and that. And everybody's got all these opinions, and we don't know how to triage or filter them, or if it's useful or not useful. So thank goodness that we have other programs and supports like here at the House of Sovereignty to be able to help give you, a path that's actually helpful for yourself and for your loved one. And lastly, you might be feeling or experiencing your own triggers. So when we talk about trauma, and going through something, you too, as family, have your own set of triggers, So for example, your loved one has been sober for a month, they've just gotten out of program, they seem to be following through with what they're supposed to be doing, and they just asked you if they could use the car. That might be a trigger. You might say, you know what, they haven't used the car since they've, been in recovery, and I'm a little worried. Are they asking to use the car because they're up to no good? Are they asking to use the car because it's going to be okay? I'm not sure. Or if they start engaging in a behavior like oversleeping or undersleeping, that's a common thing that you might witness with a loved one who's using. And so if they start, if they have depression and they're going through a cycle of depression, they're oversleeping, they may be sober, but you may be triggered that maybe they're using again. So it's very complicated. So it's very helpful for you as family to have a place where you can go and unpack this and say, here's what's going on from your experience. What are you thinking? Is this really a cause for concern? I want to continue to support my loved one and not add to the pressure they already feel. but this is how I'm feeling. And then you get to address what your concerns are. So here at the House of Sovereignty, what you see in gray here under programs and services is kind of like our 4 guiding principles or pillars of no matter what you come for, whether you come for a program that is in one-on-one based or you're coming for a program that is group based, you are going to receive these 4 things. You are going to receive an opportunity to receive emotional support. You are going to receive an opportunity to be educated about addiction and trauma and recovery and family recovery and navigating the addiction system. You will be able to have the opportunity to learn skills, which is really, really important on how, and we'll talk a little bit about the skills that we teach. We teach all sorts, but some of the ones that make up family recovery are key. And we also will teach you how to have a really solid self-care practice so that you can be in this for the long term without burning yourself out with good intentions, okay? And we do offer groups, but they're in brackets right now on the screen because they are on hold due to the impact of COVID. But I am seeing people one-on-one in person, and I am seeing people one-on-one virtually, or I could see a group virtually. If there's a group of you that wants to meet and have a discussion. And I am doing phone support as well. I have I can register you over the phone. I can have sessions with you over the phone. So there's lots of other ways. You don't have to go without the support. And then you'll be let know when we start, welcoming groups back in. So we started an outpatient program for family treatment because it was really important to us in the spirit of inviting family to be into recovery themselves from the impact of addiction, which I'm going to talk about in a second. We also felt that it was important that family understand the treatment experience. And we have developed what we consider an outpatient family treatment group that is 12 weeks, that again is on hold at the time. It's new, it just launched, and then was interrupted this year. It was launched and then interrupted by COVID. So we weren't, we're kind of in the middle of that, and it's kind of on hold right now. But it doesn't mean that you can't get the information that you would learn in the outpatient treatment program through me one-on-one. So you don't have to, worry about that. We had a drop-in group that we did for family support for those that maybe couldn't commit themselves to the treatment experience, but still wanted a place where they could get emotional support, education, skills, and self-care. And then lastly, we have a grief program called Life After Loss. And it's specifically for those who are bereaved by substance use. And I know that Canadian Mental Health has wonderful bereavement programs. And I actually spoke with some of their team at length, when looking at the development of what we were going to do, because we wanted to complement what other organizations do, but also be a bit different. And so Canadian Mental Health, anybody suffering any type of grief issue can go and get educated about grief and the bereavement process and things like that. And for those that have extenuating, grief, where it seems to be a bit complicated or ongoing, they do have services for you to meet with somebody and to work through those issues. Here at the House of Sovereignty, our program is an 8-week supportive educational group where you learn about addiction and trauma, but from the grief perspective. You learn about how grieving is different, how that process is different when the person passes away from substance use. And it's I'm sad to say I am getting calls frequently for this program. And but I'm also grateful that it exists, because I can see and I hear from those that are participating how helpful it is. So that's something that we do as well. So here we have the idea of what family recovery is. So when I'm saying to you, I want to invite you as a family member, as a concerned significant other, to enter and identify as being in recovery yourself. Now, some people will say, maybe even your loved ones, oh, you're going to be in recovery now, you couldn't just let me have my thing. Or maybe they get a bit possessive about the fact that, recovery is my thing and I'm in recovery. But that's addiction ripples and affects everybody. So it doesn't make sense to me that recovery wouldn't be for everybody, right? And so just like two people with active, who have lived experience with addiction, you may have someone who, two alcoholics may have a very different recovery program. You're allowed to have a different recovery program too. But we can all start using a shared common language so that we have an understanding that everybody has a right to be in recovery from the impact of addiction, whether it's lived experience or not. And everybody has a right to work their program in the way that promotes their own wellness, right? And so the elements that are foundational to family recovery is what you see here in this pink box, that we learned for our recovery to respond to addictive behavior of anybody with positive reinforcements. So when I was talking to you about rewards, now here's what's key. Some people say, what are you talking about? You want me to reward somebody who's already been doing so many things that are horrible, somebody who's betrayed me, who stole from me, who's done this, who's done that, who's verbally abused me? What are you telling me? I understand that perspective, and that we don't want to reward somebody for abusive, toxic, or harmful behavior. And that's not what we're promoting. What we're reinforcing is recovery behavior. We're allowing the addiction, the addiction and the chemicals already reinforce dysfunctional behavior. We don't have to help with that. But what we do need to help with is that when our loved one does something positive, and when our loved one does something right for themselves or does right by us, that we don't continue to punish them because they've had an addiction. That we use strategies to reinforce the kind of behavior that is life affirming and that we want to see more of. So if a person follows through with their going to withdrawal management, and they said they were going to go to detox or withdrawal management, and they follow through with that, a reward might be a compliment, a hug that says, I'm so proud of you for doing this. Or you might say, you know what, I know that you smoke cigarettes, and you're short on money. And because you went to withdrawal management, I'm going to drop you off this or that, or I'm going to drop you off some comfy clothing that I know you don't have for your stay there. And so what you're doing is you're offering a reward to them, and rewarding and reinforcing that when you do the right thing, even if it's uncomfortable, that I'm going to support you with these positive reinforcements. People, not only people, animals, I believe things respond to positive reinforcement and rewards. And so there's more to it than that, but that's it in a nutshell. The second thing is we want to respond in our recovery to addictive behavior with positive communication. That doesn't mean we just talk about sunshine and rainbows. What that means is that we're assertive, not aggressive, that we avoid yelling and conflict to the best of our ability. And what I mean by that is I'm not saying we avoid the issues. I'm saying we avoid the behavior of engaging in a yelling match or conflict or put downs or arguing or things that put other people in defense, because they're not helpful. And actually, conflict is the biggest killer of motivation. And so we don't want to kill motivation. Motivation is hard to come by when you have an addiction to begin with. So we use strategies deliberately that help maintain motivation. And then if you want to get upset and you want to vent about the situation, you call me. You do it with your supports. You don't have to not share what you're feeling. When you're talking to the person that has the addiction, they've already got enough on their plate, and they have what we call low frustration tolerance. Managing emotion is very difficult because of the way addiction impacts the brain. So it's not about, sometimes family will say to me, I don't want to feel like I'm babying them or I'm treating them like a child. We're not treating them like a child. What we're doing is we're using education to use science-based strategy to try and get the behavior that we want from the other person for them and for us. So we're just using educated strategic approaches that are proven to be helpful. Isn't that what we're trying to do? To be helpful, right? The third thing is we learn about how essential boundaries and problem solving is, and boundaries, we have to start use, finding our voice to let them know what is not okay with us. Boundaries help us not, I guess what I would say, like, to honor our own values, like what is important to us, and what our beliefs are and our experiences. We're allowed to say, no, this is where I stop and this is where you have to start. And that's what boundaries are about. And so they're absolutely essential. We cannot get into rescuing people from the natural consequences of their addiction, with the exception of life-saving measures. Always, always intervene if somebody is, that you find them unresponsive or they need support. That may be a natural consequence to their addiction, but that is a situation where we would take action. But in other scenarios, it's not really helpful to call in sick for them, or it's not really helpful to, um, if they spend all their money on drugs, to buy them something else that they want or something like that, or to reward them with letting them use our car or something like that. And the last piece is responding to addictive behavior with self-care and resiliency. And this kind of goes back to, what I talked about in the marathon and running this marathon for the long term, and acknowledging that, when you're in this for the long term, it's not a short race that you have to run here. So we want to make sure that we have really good self-care. And when I speak with family, I often give a couple of analogies. I told you I'm full of them. Number one is the well, and that if we see ourselves as a well of water, our loved ones that struggle with addiction or mental illness, and that have, need a lot from us, and they're worthy of that support. But sometimes what it feels like is that they're dipping into our well because they want some of what we have. They want some of our water, and they're drinking, and they're going in for another, and they're going in for another. And you're sitting there thinking, as a family, the typical family member or friend would react and say, oh, I hope they feel satiated soon. I hope that, they've gotten enough water, symbolically. But it doesn't seem like they are satiated, and it seems like they just keep taking water. And then all of a sudden you start to feel depleted and run down and burnt out, and you're like, wow, I got about a cup of water left in this well and I'm thirsty myself, right? And so self-care is about learning about where your other sources of water are, so that you can replenish the well, and so that when people are dipping in and taking a cup, you don't get to the point where you feel like you're running dry. Because feeling like you are burnt out is going to make it very difficult for you to live out these strategies and practice a healthy family recovery response. And then also, when we talk about resiliency and being able to have the grit and the stamina to endure this process, um, it's like I often think of a lighthouse. And so when we talk about being resilient, I talk to my families about being the lighthouse, and that your job is to be a sense of light. Your job is to be on the shore and to be a light, a guiding light for the people that you love that have addiction. They're out there on the water, and sometimes the water's rough. And sometimes you look and you see your loved one and it looks like their boat has tipped over. And you want to run out there and maybe save them because you're so worried. But if you do that, you can't be the light, because you're too busy getting caught up in trying to fix something that isn't yours to fix. What a lighthouse does is knows its place and stays with its, self planted firmly in a position, because they know that is their role and that is their purpose, and that the boats need to learn and the captains need to learn to self-manage their ship. And if they're in distress, there are coast guards that will respond, not the lighthouse. And again, so this is kind of like a boundary thing too, but it's a way to kind of perceive what your role is, and in order for you to be able to have the self-care that you need and the resiliency to keep doing what's helpful, because you love these people in your life. So that's about it.
Thank you, Cynthia. That was wonderful. So in terms of time, I think we're at 11:30, but I think we can quickly go over some of these, and then the resources that I want to share for Canadian mental health programs and others in the community. I'll make sure to share in our in the Google Drive, and also in the description of the YouTube video when it's posted on the CMHA YouTube channel. So you can go ahead and go over this slide.
Okay. So, and I want to hear from you as well, like what you feel your impact has been. So just before I do that, somebody had a question about the Life After Loss bereavement program, if it's different from the bereavement at Canadian Mental Health. And yes, it is different. You know, we are not trying to duplicate what's already out there. The program is different. So if you've been through some bereavement support at Canadian Mental Health, what you'll find is that the Life After Loss program will just complement what you've already been doing. So, but it is a different experience. So, you know, and I just thank you for being generous. I have received a couple of notes from people, and I just wanted to say I appreciate your encouragement and I appreciate the compliments, you know, that I'm getting. I just wanted to acknowledge that. So as far as the impact of COVID, you know, this is going to echo a little bit of what we talked about yesterday. Is for families, there has been a decrease in in-person group meetings in a group fashion. And what I can tell you is when we launched these programs, the number one thing that was reported to me of what my family members really, really enjoyed was coming together as a group with other family members. It felt so good to know that you were not alone in dealing with the insanity that comes along with an addictive lifestyle. And they found so much support and comfort in hearing other people going through similar things that I know that not having these in-person meetings has had a huge impact on them. And so that's one thing. The other thing is, yes, there's been an increase in virtual support, but there is very little virtual and online group support for family and friends. And, you know, there may be virtual, you know, Naranon meetings or Al-Anon meetings that are available, or even smart recovery meetings for family and friends. Those things are all available online and accessible and probably happen on a regular basis. So please, if that's all you have available to you, please tune into those places and get some support in regards to that. We don't know how long this COVID experience and restriction is going to last here in our community. So, you know, one of the things we're trying to work on is getting our outpatient treatment program and our Life After Loss program, and maybe even our family support program up and running in a virtual way. They weren't initially created to be on a virtual platform. We didn't anticipate the COVID experience, but we're looking at finding ways that we're able to do that, so that hopefully somewhere down the future, but in the interim, you don't have to be without support. You can call me, and I will make sure that I type my work cell into the chat for everybody. And you know, there's been changes to the process of accessing treatment. So if people have been waiting for their loved one to get into residential, they may have found that the wait lists are astronomical, that they're huge, and you may start to feel discouraged and about it, and about what's going to happen from now until then. What are you talking about? 8 months before I can get in, 4 months, over a year, some places. So this goes back to what Evelina and I have been saying this whole time is, you know, we really need you to think outside the box of residential treatment and start and giving them choices. Look at the health unit website and start letting them explore and build relationships with a recovery community before they even go to treatment. So people are feeling helpless, they're feeling stressed, especially if they're living with a loved one that is in active addiction. So, and what have you noticed from your perspective? You know, does anybody want to share what they've been going through? Maybe while they're thinking about that, Evelina, we could go to the next slide and talk about some other things.
Sure. So getting help, we already talked about this, whatever works for you. There's lots of different options, whether it's a formal support or informal support. I would just, as a family member, just, you know, education is key. And I think all of you taking the time today, whether you're impacted from a loved one's addiction or not, learning about the resources that are available in our local community and online. One of the benefits that I've noticed is even providing this webinar online for free, and having individuals access that maybe weren't able to access information online for free outside of a face-to-face setting. I think that's cool. I don't know if you want me to go through these slides. These are other.
I just want to make a point that we have all sorts of different help available for those that are not only living with addiction issues, but also for people that are impacted by addiction like yourselves, for concerned significant others. The number that you see at the top here is our main number, and it has an extension 115. That is going to bring you to our intake department where they can triage your call. But if you are a concerned significant other, I don't have an extension. I have a work cell. And so I've typed that into the chat to everybody at 226-340-1194. You're welcome to text me. If you could identify who you are, though, that would be helpful in a text, or you're welcome to call me and leave me a message, and I'll get back to you as soon as I can.
And just briefly, K Mental Health in Windsor-Essex has lots of different programs. You do have to go to the Crisis Mental Wellness Center, which is at 744 Alette, to go through the coordinated access. Whether it's that's walk-in 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. Monday to Friday, or you can call the crisis line, say, maybe it's not a crisis, but I'd like to know about a certain service. Can I schedule a time, or can I speak to someone right away? If it's between the business hours, you're likely to be able to speak to someone right away, go through whatever you're looking for in terms of services that are free in the city, and be referred to those services. So just FYI, CMHA also provides family support groups. So I would just suggest checking out Canadian Mental Health Association's website for under events. That's usually where they're posted, or on social media. Any other questions you have about services that we provide, or any other resource or services in locally, I could always find that information out, whether it's from the health unit or even talking to partners like House of Software Scene. Please email me. You have my email in the chat. These are some other online resources like Wellness Together Canada. This came out during COVID. It's mental health and substance supports during the pandemic online. There's Connects Ontario. So if you're looking to find out up-to-date information, whether it's gambling or substance use or mental health, that's connected with 211. So either you can call 211 and ask, or you could check out Connects Ontario.
Evelina, they have an app as well, Connects Ontario, called Connect Go, and it's super easy to use, and you can, still get the information live. So it's live, and it's a live answered. You're not going to get an automated machine when you call that number. So that's really nice.
Awesome.
Yeah.
And the crisis line that I mentioned earlier, 519-973-4435, someone will answer that phone number. A social worker will answer 24/7. Even if you're not in crisis and you want to call and see what that's like, if you ever, tell someone to call, it's always good to know what to expect. So you can even call that number and say, hey, I just wanted to call to see what this is like. Even if you don't need services, it's okay. You don't have to be in crisis. I would recommend you, if you're ever recommending a resource to someone, to know what to expect, so you can let that person know as well. Just like Cynthia was mentioning, right? So CAMH has an app. During COVID, they came out with coping strategies. There's a lot of helpful applications for your phone. There's tons right now. So if you want something to either mindfulness meditations or anything like that, tips for sleep or anything like, there's lots online. Family Services does counseling on the phone. They're an EAP provider for some places, or they have certain funding to cover some sessions, or during the pandemic right now, they have a phone number that you can call and talk to a counselor just one-on-one. And CMHA also has a pandemic therapist. So if you know someone's struggling with stress or anxiety because of COVID, and they're not linked to any services and they want to talk to a therapist, they can call Crisis and ask for the pandemic therapist. Her name's Dana. I think she's going to be around for a little while, so they can get a few free sessions with her. Bounce Back is CBT skills. Life coach, you connect with, you do workbooks working on different things related to mood, assertiveness, communication, sleep, dealing with anxiety. And Big White Wall is online forum that's peer supported, peer led. Anyone could make an account. It's anonymous. They have counselors that moderate the forums. You can share information there. If you're struggling, you can get feedback from others. There's safe rules, so there's no harassment or bullying or anything like that going on. Otherwise, the account would be removed if there was something happening. But it's monitored because if someone's really struggling, so the counselor can follow up. And there's modules on there that are free on even reducing drinking, on improving sleep, on a lot of different things, absolutely free. So check those out. And the last thing that we're hoping to do, sorry that we're
we're like way over.
Oh boy. Okay,
but that's okay. This takes like a minute, so I think we should just finish it. If you got to dip out, that's okay. Like,
yeah, thank you for staying with us. I know we're quite a bit over.
Thank you for staying with us. But we just would like to close with a self-compassion practice. Because I'm very much about promoting having a compassionate heart, but not just compassion for those that struggle with addiction and trauma, but compassion for yourself as the helper, because I know that you do so much and that you deserve that compassion. And so I just want us all to take a minute to kind of get centered with ourselves and maybe take a breath and close our eyes or stare at something and let our gaze soften and just listen to me as I take you through this. And as I read these statements, what I want you to do is I want you to repeat them in your mind. So as we go through this, just, close your eyes and lower your shoulders. Get curious about your breath. What kind of rhythm is it falling in right now? Allowing it to just, be whatever rhythm it needs to be in this moment. And after we just take a minute, we begin to settle with all this information, all the knowledge, all the information and emotional experience you may have had, even listening to this information. I want you to repeat after me. May I be safe. May I be healthy in body and in mind. May I be happy, truly happy. May I live my life with peace and ease. And then we offer the compassion we want for ourselves to others by saying, may you be safe. May you be healthy in body and in mind. May you be happy, truly happy. And may you live your life with peace and ease. And just take a breath, and when you're ready, come back into your space. Thank you, Evelina, for inviting me to do this with you over the last couple of days.
Oh, thank you for agreeing and making the time. And I know we had a few phone calls, and I really appreciate your time. And thank you all for joining us and feedback. And it's been a truly pleasurable, wonderful experience interacting with Cynthia, hearing her wisdom and knowledge, and with all of you in chat. So thank you.
Thank you. Take care, everybody.
Take care of yourselves. Goodbye.